Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we stand here today on this beautiful state capitol campus in the midst of these magnificent neoclassical buildings, it's really hard to imagine that over 100 years ago, Olympia's first public high school was erected on this very spot that we're standing on today. It was known as William Winlock Miller High School, commonly known as Olympia High School. But in 1907, when the building we are commemorating first began to serve as a high school, Olympia, and this area of the city in particular, was far different than it is today. The only, at that time, the only functional government building in the immediate vicinity was a rather forlorn old territorial capitol building. It was a wooden structure that stood about where the legislative building is today. That building, which had been built in the 1850s on 12 acres of land that had been donated to the territory by Olympia's founder, Edmund Sylvester, was already, by 1907, it was a real relic. And it wouldn't see many more years before it was torn down to make way for the legislative building, or the Capitol building as we commonly call it. That territorial Capitol building that stood here in 1907 was right next to another relic, a partially built foundation and a basement of a Capitol building that would never be. It's the so-called Flag Building, F-L-A-G-G. It was named after the architect who designed it. Construction began on that building in 1893, but it was abandoned after they built the basement and foundation due to the financing problems that were caused by the great financial panic of 1893. Things were so dismal up here in 1907 that our relatively new state government had seemingly abandoned this area as well. The Capitol building having been relocated to downtown Olympia in 1905 in a refurbished and enlarged building that had served for a short period of time as the Thurston County Courthouse. We know it today, of course, as the old Capitol building, and it's presently the offices, has the offices of the Superintendent of Public Instruction within it. The only other building close to where we are now that had any connection to state government in 1907 was the Governor's Mansion, which in that year was under construction. It was being constructed so that our governor would have a suitable place to welcome visitors to the Alaska-Yukon Exposition of 1909. That was Seattle's first World's Fair, which was held in North Seattle on what we now know as the campus of the University of Washington. So in 1907, the year William Winlock Miller High School came into being on this spot as Olympia's first public building devoted entirely to providing a high school education. It was really a dramatic development. High schools being, as Charlie Curie has already mentioned, a rather rare thing in Washington at that time. Although we don't know this for certain, it's possible that the building of the high school at this location was part of a grander scheme by Olympia's leaders to entice the legislature to keep Olympia as the state capital and to build a capital campus at this location that was befitting this growing western state. What better way to show our lawmakers that Olympia was a modern and up-to-date city, a proper seat of government, than to have a high school that could serve the community, of course, but also serve as a school away from home for the children of legislators during a long legislative session. Now, why do I speculate that this could have been done to entice lawmakers to keep the capital in Olympia? Well, there were legislators at that time who viewed the capital as a real political plum, and that was a plum they wanted to take to another town if they could. Indeed, in 1905, just 2 years before this the building was built here, the first OHS, the legislature actually passed a bill moving the capital to Tacoma. And although I could say this, I think as a judge, this act was clearly unconstitutional. It really was, since the seat of government, according to our state constitution of 1889, can only be moved with the consent of the voters. You have to have a vote of the people to move the seat of government from the seat that was established when we adopted the Constitution. But the issue never had to make its way into court because our then governor, Albert Meade, vetoed the bill moving the capital to Tacoma with a very strong message, which makes, as an Olympian, makes really good reading. So the matter never did have to go to court. But there is no doubt that in 1906, when Mary McFadden Miller gifted the property for the high school that would bear her deceased husband's name, there was concern in Olympia, legitimately, that the Capitol could be moved at some future time. And the high school was certainly a great selling point for this community. Now, whether our leaders here in Olympia at that time had that motivation in developing high school is not known for certain. But it is a fact that shortly after the high school was built, high school was built in 1907, very shortly after that, a process was set in motion to build a group of buildings on this site that would accommodate the legislature, the Supreme Court, and the offices of the principal executive officers of the state of Washington. And if this plan was carried out, Olympians believe that it would quell probably forever any effort to move the Capitol. And happily, in 1911, just 4 years after the high school was opened, the 1911 session of the legislature authorized the State Capitol Commission to proceed with a nationwide design competition for a Capitol campus. And a plan was submitted by a little-known architecture firm in New York City, Wilder and White. And their plan was selected over 29 other competitors for this architectural prize to design a Capitol campus for the state of Washington. It wasn't too long after their selection that the Wilder and White designed Temple of Justice was under construction as the first of the 6 buildings in the Wilder and White plan. The Temple of Justice was completed sufficiently for the court to occupy it by January 1913. In fact, the governor's inaugural ball of 1913, January 1913, was held in the Temple of Justice. And then after the ball was over, the court moved in. But the building wasn't completely finished, but it was finished sufficiently to occupy it. The Temple of Justice was followed by the Insurance Building, which was finished in 1921. And of course, the Legislative Building, or the Capitol Building as we call it, was officially completed in 1928. But with the state's acceptance of the Wilder and White plan, which called for a large Capitol campus surrounding this Capitol group of buildings, days of the high school that was built here in 1907, the high school that we're commemorating here today, the days for that building were numbered. Although it would be 1928 before the landscaping plan prepared by the famous landscape architecture firm in Boston, the Olmsted Brothers, was 1928 before that was adopted. It was accepted by just about everyone that the high school building would soon have to go in order to allow completion of the plan for what we now know as the West Capitol Campus. So the state purchased the building, and in 1919, Olympia High School, still known as William Winlock Miller, moved to the east a bit, just across Capitol Way, into the new OHS, the school that many in this audience, including yours truly, attend. That building was built in the first phase in 1919. An addition was added for the auditorium and the gymnasium in 1926. The old building, when it moved out, the state was faced with the task of raising the building, tearing it down, but very conveniently it burned down before they had to do that. The new Olympia High School across the street that I talked about served as Olympia's high school until 1961, the only high school in Olympia until 1961. When that building, like its predecessor, was sold to the state to accommodate development of the East Capitol Campus. The third Olympia High School, as we all know, lies south of here between Carline Avenue and North Street. And I don't think anyone who is living today expects to see the Capitol campus expand so far to encompass that property, but who knows? Probably they didn't think that when they built this building in 1907, that the Capitol campus would take it over, or in 1919 they maybe never thought the Capitol campus would make it across Capitol Way. It is worth noting, though, Principal Grant, that the building that you were in, that property, does have a very close connection with our state's history. It is located on what was once a dairy farm owned by Hazard Stevens, who was the son of the first territorial governor, Isaac Stevens. So our great high school, Olympia High School, William Winlock Miller High School, has a rich history and one that has had a very close connection to the development of our state government and this state capital of Canada. It's only fitting today that we commemorate that first building and recall its prominence as an educational institution and recall its influence over the development of this beautiful state capital of Canada. Thank you very much.